Sure. I think we're ready to go.
All right, everyone ready? Right. Let us know when you're ready. All good? Okay, awesome. All right, so real quick, obviously, obligatory disclaimer, these opinions are our own. They don't reflect any past, previous, or current or future employee. This is an abridged talk that we put together after about 18 months of work, so this is like crazy accelerated, but we wanted to put it together for you guys.
So I'm Cameron Craig. I'm the VP of User Experience and Product Strategy at Macy's.com.
My name's Keith Conway. I'm a user experience consultant. I work with Cameron. I'm not a full-time employee, but I do a lot of UX for lots of different kind of groups, and this is kind of our experience on what we did at Macy's.
So the name of the talk is Nobody Gets Fired for Choosing IBM, but maybe they should. So when I went to business school in the 80s, this was a common thing that everybody told me. When I left school and actually started work, I heard this more and more, which always interested me because I always kind of wondered why. So in the 50s, as we know, IBM kind of decided to send salespeople around the world to essentially sell systems worldwide to emerging companies, large-scale Fortune 500 companies, and became this pervasive force in business around the world. And it solved a bunch of unmet customer need. It allowed companies to do things that they had never been able to do before, whether it was automating their P&L, making inventory highly available, et cetera. They were doing this largely by implementing these monolithic systems, and at the time, that was innovative. As we've worn on, we've started neglecting customer need. We've actually, to some degree, made this a part of our corporate culture, and I've spent the last 20 years of my career actually kind of cleaning up after these giant IBM implementations, where essentially at some point the business actually isn't about serving the customer anymore, or actually working, at its primary goal. It's actually serving the beast. It's maintaining the system. It's becoming a culture of no, and it's essentially this endless patchwork of what we can do based on what the system will support. And at that point, innovation starts to become legacy. And the minute that we start forgetting who our customer is and what they need, the business starts to die, and ultimately our legacy starts to kill us.
So that's what we're really here to kind of talk to you guys about. It's not about IBM specifically. Any technological innovation was an innovation because it solved unmet customer needs, it returned value, it did something valuable. But over time, your competitors, anybody else can do that because the rate of change of technology's evolution is just so fast right now. So we're here to talk more about how do you actually save yourself from yourself as a large corporation or a large organization. And two main things you need is solving unmet customer needs, building a great company. Like, these are your kind of mentalities, because a lot of, if you talk about social engineering, red teaming, kind of these ideas that we're folding that you guys all know about, there's a lot of preconceived notions about it's nefarious, you give them malevolent behavior, they're very specific kind of attacking vectors that kind of come to mind. And in order to move a large organization towards collective action, you need one and two, which is the customer and a great company. And then if you're not returning value, then you're not finding a way to feed the innovation back to keep it alive. And then fourth, you have to do this without shutting the company off, because if you're like an oil and gas company, if you're a bank, you can't just stop and then make sure things can kind of keep working.
I mean, that really is the brilliant trick that IBM has kind of locked us all into. Our business ceased to exist even intraday if we shut any of this stuff down, so we're locked in.
So our goal today is to try and get you guys as smart as possible, as fast as possible, to kind of give you a framework to use this on your own. Hopefully, if you guys work for large companies, to apply this on your own. So the first thing you got to do is assess the environment. You got to build a message or craft the message, find the right people, and then it's all about timing.
So the first thing is assessing the environment. It's defining how and where the technology is inhibiting your organization, and kind of the larger thing that you're after. It's kind of going outside of your four walls as well and understanding what's going on in the economic environment around you or the market that you play in. For us, we play in a global market, so we have to look at this from around the world. What is the space of retail doing in this particular example? And how is the economic environment around us actually affecting the business? And then finally, it's kind of looking at the culture and deciding where the human factor is, again, because this self-fulfilling prophecies to some degree of servicing the system starts to define how the culture works. It's bringing these things together, understanding them and describing them in ways that the human beings can actually understand so that you can break the thing down.
Yeah, so real quick, no matter what message you have, the C-level or the board, they have to get behind it. And in order for them to get behind it, you have to speak their language, which is, revenue, profit and loss, P&E. You have to understand what these things are and understand now we live in a global market right now. It doesn't matter what you do, macroeconomic trends are going to affect. And you have to be an MBA to kind of do this. You have to know enough to kind of speak their language so they listen to you when, you're actually talking, which brings us to the right part. So, like we said, the C-level has to evangelize, not just buy in. If you buy them in, you're just like, okay, hey, we agree, but then they're not going to go back and actually put it on their earnings calls. They're not going to put that back down into the organization. And this is basically just like an academic experiment. So we're actually going to go through some of the examples we have later, but we're going to just give you the framework right now. So what we did is we built an org chart, or what I'm telling you to do is build an org chart and do a threat assessment. Certain people you can work with, certain you can collaborate with, certain people you probably want to ignore because they're going to see you as a threat. And then what you want to do is plot your run across multiple domains in parallel. So it's not just one person that you want to kind of make your run through. You have to be able to go find partners in marketing, merchandising, other different parts of the organization that you can seed ideas to so that you're going to go up here. And even though they're going to take credit for little ideas, the whole rising tide is going to float your boat over there. And that's the trick.
I mean, everybody kind of knows that when storming the castle, you're not getting to the king immediately. You have to sort of work with the levels that you're working with. So for us, it was all about trying to figure out what that level was, like Keith said, that we could seed the message to kind of get our message up to the king, so to speak. So timing is everything. And as we were saying, it's that proper seeding of a particular part of the message that you want to resonate. It's building that common framework of language for your entire audience. It's going broad. It's looking across the organization and deciding where your friends are, where your foes are, and seeding the appropriate message to each of those groups and having that message rise up. And then once a common language or a carrier wave is developed, it's kind of dropping the next part of the message until you're building that curiosity to the point where eventually, as you're going up, continuing to rinse and repeat this, the curiosity sort of builds. People begin to understand this. You start to have less friction in the organization. So the meetings that you're having where you're talking about these concepts become more and more fluid. And then ultimately, curiosity builds to the point and you've hit enough of the sort of key players in your organization that you get the invite to kind of come and talk to the C-level person.
All right. So our process was kind of like a random hodgepodge of social engineering, red teaming, and design thinking. And for us, we're using the kind of definition that Chris Hadnagy and Michelle Fincher kind of posited, which is essentially influencing people to take decisions which they didn't think or know they should or should not have taken. And Chris and Michelle really, in their APSC class, made an awesome point about not losing the teaching moment, where if you're tricking somebody or using kind of nefarious behavior or kind of manipulation, then someone's going to catch that, and then it's not going to be a lasting way to build a relationship moving forward. And as we go back, this whole sparking curiosity, new people ideas, in retail is like a very technologically kind of archaic mentality where they're literally stuck in the 50s right now with mainframes and whatnot. So giving people the confidence to speak up and ask questions where they're not afraid to just be wrong or not understand what's going on allows them to actually participate beyond just saying, okay, you do this, you do that. I'm being very tactical. I'm just do this right now, right? So that's the social engineering part. The red teaming is more a state of mind for us. And Mike Azenko had a really good book about red teaming. You should check it out. And he kind of posed that as like a state of mind and also how you just being devil's advocate. And that's what we're kind of doing. We're not being devil's advocate for sake of being devil's advocate, but trying to really understand where the opportunities lie for the customer and the business and how to actually feed that back into the system. And then our background is in design. So that's where design thinking comes from. And Tim Brown's the CEO of IDEO. They did a lot of design thinking, trying to put design in places where it didn't exist before. And that's kind of where we come from. So what we're going to do now is go through a handful of slides from our deck. We can't show you what we actually did for the whole thing because it's proprietary, obviously. but we're going to talk through kind of just different bits and pieces to kind of give you guys an idea. So when we build our deck, like my background came from film, sound, and special effects. I did double major at Savannah College of Art and Design. So for me, this is kind of like a visual storyboard wrapped up as a business plan and a strategic vision for the company. And the goal is, could the CEO and the board understand what's going on, but could it also get down to an associate level employee who, you know, might have 3 kids and working multiple jobs and not really care about the finance of the company. So as we were talking about earlier, the main issue that we kept running into is that technology is inhibiting the user experience, the business processes, everything else, but people don't really understand what's going on. We would have meetings where we'd install kiosks that would be, you'd push the kiosk and it would animate, and it wouldn't even slide. And I'm looking at Instagram for someone I used to work with, and his kid is sitting in front of an LCD or a giant TV screen and trying to swipe the screen, thinking it's like a giant iPad right now. So they didn't get the mental models transferring through to all the generations. So we're like, okay, look, in 10 years, a phone is going to be as fast as your brain, and that's going to be less than $1,000. And that's going to absolutely change just everything right now. I mean, think about, we're living in a time right now where the cycles and evolutions of technology are escalating so fast that you can't even really see beyond the horizon. And Ray Kurzweil talks about this, people at Singularity University. I mean, timing, whatever, it's not really relevant, but it's just that the idea to get them to think about technology is not just changing the business, it's changing customer behavior, it's changing society, it's changing everything. Secondarily, we lost half our market capitalization within a matter of 6 months, and to a point where 2 hedge funds are trying to architect a hostile takeover because the real estate was worth more than what the stock was actually worth. And so when we talk about this, and you hear about this on the earnings call, then they start listening. And so we would literally sit on the earnings call and text back and forth and take notes, and then ask our bosses, like, what about this? What's going on here? And you hear certain things, and you're like, how does the market actually perceive this as value? And if they are, is this what our board is actually perceiving as value as well? And why is it? And again, you know, I'd be up at 2 a.m. watching Bloomberg on my phone before I passed out, and it's like a quarter of all GDP or economic output in the world is in negative interest rate territory. And what that means is, if I'm a bank and I'm giving you guys a loan, that means I am paying you interest for the benefit of taking a loan from me, which makes absolute no sense whatsoever. And that is, so we're just kind of in this really crazy, bizarre land with finance and everything, and that feeds back to essentially how we get debt, how we pay for more expansion, how we grow the business. And again, this is how you communicate, and things are actually important to the top level.
So before we leave that, the fascinating thing about this is, as we got smarter about this, we started to be very predictive. We intraday, or within the couple of days, if anything was happening globally, we could predict within probably about a point or two what our own stock price could do. So if we wanted to be nefarious, we actually probably could have made a lot of money doing that. But between the two of us, we were actually predicting where the stock was going to go before the stock went there. So the second thing that we talked about, and kind of now we're showing you sort of in practice, is the message. And again, the message needs to be bold. It needs to be easily understood, and it kind of needs to be in your face. And we try to keep this, and you're seeing again these actual tactical slides that got our execs to pay attention. And it's literally like, look, we are slaves to the machine. We are at this point queue managers, and meanwhile our customers daily are telling us about these problems and we're ignoring them. And it was only at the point where you could start to see these really bold examples that you start to catch hold, right? And again, this was another example. One of the articles that I had read as we were doing this was this idea about English lawyers. They still wear these wigs in 2016. They've done this for more than 180 years. The bottom line is, there's nothing in any English law that says they need to do this. They just simply do it because nobody told them to stop. And it's a pretty good metaphor for what goes on in a giant corporation. And it was like, all right, is everybody awake? You're like, can you hear me in the back? So once we, again, kind of establish this carrier wave, now it's time to load payload on.
So this was, we went through probably 15 to 20 different major passes of our deck. And our deck was always one slide, one idea, and it was simple enough so that if this landed on somebody else's desk, they could just read through it like someone was having a conversation with them during lunch, and they'd be like, oh, okay, actually, I can actually get this. And it wasn't this giant tome of a PowerPoint, just dense of all this information that no one really cares about and won't read and won't retain later. So we talked earlier about having, your title, your concept in 7 or 8 words. And this is one of the ones we came up with, which was like the new baseline: simplicity, convenience, and trust. And everything was always so complicated. And you always end up with these ideas of self-preservation, people working to get funding to kind of potentially keep their own part of the fiefdom working. And for us, we're like, look, it's really, really easy. Simplicity, where if you have an idea in your head, it's one click, one swipe, one action, get it done. Convenience is like, give someone their time back. Don't make them search. I mean, we had issues, and if you look on any of the financial press, any blogs, anything out about fashion today in retail, people can't find what they want. If they're in smaller towns and there's sizes that don't correlate with what they want, and just weren't listening to the customer, and just making people have to work harder. And trust, this is not only the security part here that everyone cares about, but also, are you being consistent? Are you actually gaining trust from your users, from your constituency, from your base? And it was really simple. It was the best customer experience wins. This is actually our whole mantra. And the irony, or kind of funny thing, is we'll go to random meetings and someone will say, oh, or Cam will talk to somebody and be like, oh, hey, are you the simplicity, convenience, trust people? Oh, okay, cool. Like, I didn't know you guys did that. Like,
Yeah, I mean, I literally just came from Cincinnati, Ohio. So I've never been to Cincinnati, Ohio before for our company, but I guess we have like a giant corporate presence there. And amazingly, somebody came into this meeting that I was having. I was in training all week, and somebody I never met before comes in and says exactly what Keith said, and actually has the deck. It was like, how did you get this deck? And it turns out that it's so pervasive at this point in our company that people, anybody who's a decision maker at some level across kind of the wide swath of the area that we're in, has somehow gotten a copy of this deck. I mean, it was fascinating. In the work team that I was in, there was somebody who's been kind of, I won't say an arch rival, but a rival for the last 6 years of my existence there. And all of a sudden, she's just like, yeah, I've seen the deck too. I get it. It's good.
She's like, it's 108 slides, right?
Yeah.
It's like the right number. Like,
yeah,
whoa.
it was like, okay, she actually has the deck. Crazy. But the sort of friction, if you will, between us largely is kind of been mitigated because everybody has this understanding now. We're no longer working against one another. It's like, okay, we're on the simplicity and convenience part, right? Security's on the trust part. There's no more like, what are we saying? How do we mean this? How does it work? What do we do with it? And like Keith said, again, we're kind of just showing you techniques at this point. Like, we've kept things to simple messaging, 8 words or less, right? And these important concepts, we'll pause, we'll have these visuals, we'll go through a bunch of different visuals so that everybody can get kind of their understanding of it, right? What does it mean to technology? What does it mean to legal? What does it mean to privacy? And we have visuals that go with that, and we tailor these decks so that everybody, again, has that common framework of language, but some sort of concept that resonates with them.
So this is like the second slide of our deck, and this was from the Arizona Boneyard. It's actually it's either an old hydrogen bomb or nuclear bomb, but it's
bunker buster.
Yeah, it's called the physics package though. And then the text is actually our kind of what our company, our brand is saying out to the world to try and reboot our stock. And it's like, okay, we're going to feed this back in the system. And it's a metaphor of, okay, we have a huge decision to make, and it's not going to be easy. It's going to be a lot of work. And, but there's also a lot of power and a lot of opportunity. I mean, for us, it's like if you're Macy's is a giant retailer, and it's once you do one kind of e-commerce site, you've done them all. So the only thing to do anything more interesting is do something bigger with a lot more scale and a lot more complexity. And that's what really excites us about this, is can we actually find a way to get people to move this large Titanic or monolith forward in a way that people like doing the work that they're doing, creating good jobs, good money for them, value for the business, customers are psyched. And this is kind of, again, one of the ways to kind of grab people's attention, because slide 2, they're like, what am I looking at? And it's a place where people are wearing suits every day, not, it's not like a Silicon Valley kind of startup kind of culture. So when we talked about doing our org chart and kind of our threat assessment, we literally sat down one day, had coffee, and so we had to black out all the names for confidentiality, but we literally looked at, okay, who is in our chunk of the company right. Now, not the whole thing as one giant enchilada, but okay, here's who we know. Here's who's been there the longest. You want to talk about the threat assessment a little bit?
Yeah, sure. So, I mean, essentially, like I was saying before, what we did is we kind of looked at everybody and decided who is an ally, who is a potential threat, who needs to be brought along, and what is the trigger point that they need to have to be brought along, right? It's not just simply a blanket message of, okay, this is what we're doing, you have no choice in this matter. It literally is seeding them with the information, the pivot point, that's the thing that they care about, right? Because it's not that people are lining up in these companies and mindlessly doing their job. They actually do care. It's just kind of finding that point that says, do you care about this? Yes. Great. It's almost like human BFF, the thing that we just saw. It's like, it literally is, okay, what is the point of access?
Yeah. Well, a lot of times too,
exploiting it.
Well, a lot of times they were breathing the same air for so long that they couldn't see beyond their own small piece of the puzzle, and that they just couldn't realize that, oh, there's actually a simple solve with tech, or if I actually work with somebody else to do attribution or whatever, that could actually not only solve their problem, but 3 or 4 other people's problems. And that's when you start putting this together with kind of multiple people in parallel to kind of push this thing forward.
And so, lastly, this is one thing that we're showing, and this is, it's a humorous anecdote, but again, once you get to that point where people are listening, you need to make sure that they really understand what the message was, because at some point, when you're dealing with the higher up echelons of your organization, they're going to assume that they know more than you do. So we researched the daylights out of most of our use cases, and this was one that was utterly hilarious, but it actually was challenged by the chief omnichannel officer and ultimately the CEO of our company around both inventorying and availability. And essentially it was like, this thing's been available for 6 years. It's been sitting on a shelf. Actually, there are 6 of them that were sitting on a shelf for 6 years. The hilarious thing was we spent money to actually search engine optimize this, and we spent money to search engine market this. So you could find this through Google, and then we're on the call talking about this, and the chief omnichannel officer is essentially like, no, this is not true. It's like, and you can hear the keys moving, right? He's Googling it, and he's like, damn it, Cameron. And then it's like, yeah, but this is one of those things that we would ship directly from a vendor. We don't have it. Like, you're not thinking about it the right way. And essentially the chief customer experience officer calls out, it says it's in stock. It says you can pick it up in store. I was like, oh, geez. So he had to sort of give us that point. So the next time he was in San Francisco and I was handing him the books that were on Keith's reading list, I made sure that he had the bookmark.
Now there's only 5 in stock.
Yeah. Actually, the other 4 are in my office, so other execs will be getting these as well. But it does really kind of hammer that point home, right? It's a very physical, tangible example of something that you can bring forward to say, it really is this way. It's a wake-up call.
Yeah. All right, so this was the last slide of our deck. It's kind of full circle from the beginning of our deck. We started with the bunker buster and the kind of brand Kool-Aid, as it were. But this actually works because for us, our goal was to try and figure out how do we pivot the corporate strategy. And the way to prove that is that if they talk about it on the earnings call, and they actually did that. And on the last earnings call, the stock went up, I think, between $3 or $6, which is, if you do the math from the stock price to how many outstanding shares, it's almost like $1.5 to $1.8 billion in market cap, which isn't all us. But the things we did got to them, and they actually put it on their earnings call. So it works. And then now it's like, okay, the next thing for us is that now that the CEO said yes, how do we actually get them to do it and keep moving forward? Because it's a 160,000 person company that's still trying to move ahead in the future. And that's our talk. Thank you, guys.
And not that I'm trying to stick it to IBM, but one more thing. So one of the questions that we got asked as we were talking about this is, how pervasive is this problem? Is this really every large companies' problem. This is actually from IBM itself for the System Z, which is the precursor. It's the semi-current version of the system that they developed in the 60s, which we're actually running on an AS400. Boo. And you can see right here, 22 of the top 25 US retailers are still on System Z. 71% of the global Fortune 500 companies are running System Z. 80% of the world's corporate data resides or originates in System Z. So it really is that pervasive. Thanks.
Thanks, guys.
No Windows vulnerability on them.
It's true. The problem is if you're running that in a blade in a single data center, and I'm not saying that we're doing that, but redundancy might be a bit of a problem.
Delta can tell you all about them.